Right, thank you, Marina. I need to apologise because I'm used to people running out of my lectures because I make them feel sick. But I've actually got to run out of this one when it's finished because I'm so good at time management, I forgot I'm actually presenting somewhere else at 2:30. So I will literally just have to run out of the room, so don't take it as any sort of... my own presentation hasn't made me feel ill. Really, because I've only got 20 minutes, I'm just going to talk about stuff about peer review. Me and a couple of colleagues have done quite a bit of work on implementing peer review and self-evaluation. The self-evaluation stuff we've got lots of data on. Peer review's been more qualitative, which I'm going to talk briefly about today. First important thing is to say exactly what I mean when I say peer review, because the biggest problem when you peer review is that people think it's different things. Talk about some design variables within that, talk about the rationale for using it. In particular, talk a little bit about how we tried to implement this, and I'm going to... Charlotte there did all the work, really. I'm just free riding on Charlotte. So when I get stuck, I'll just throw it over to you to explain how you did it. And also just a very, very informal, some qualitative research we did from students about their concerns about peer review. And actually what the students here said very much chimed with what other research has found about concerns with implementing it. I think the first important thing is what the heck is it? I'm using peer review to talk about a situation where students evaluate the work of their classmates. Okay, that's what I'm talking about when I say peer review. So this is students evaluating the work produced by their colleagues. They're not giving it a final summative mark. They might put a mark on it, but that mark isn't going to count towards their degree or their module, but it's purely formative. Ultimately, the lecturer or the tutor will grade the piece of work. What it isn't is sometimes peer review is focused on situations where you've got group work and you look at different ways of getting the members of the group to rank the contributions of people in that group. And unfortunately, that's called peer review as well. But this is very much focused on students reviewing the work that their colleagues or classmates have produced. So I'm sorry if that's not what you were expecting. Having done this for a few years, and we unsuccessfully tried to bid for some HEA money, but they didn't like it. But I looked at the literature. It's pretty clear if you look at peer review, and by peer review, this idea of students evaluating other students' work, is that in reality, you can implement it in lots and lots of different ways. And actually, that's a criticism with the way the literature on it has developed. So there's a very, very widely cited paper, a guy called Topping in 1998, and he included 17 different variables that it could vary on. Okay. This was updated, Galen Arts Coaches and the Assessment in Higher Education. They added to it, they said actually this peer review is even more complicated and there's even more variations on it than was originally outlined. And what this does is it gives you issues if you're looking at this as a research area, because unfortunately, and I would say if ever you're reviewing a journal article on this topic, please make sure, if anybody's reviewing the impact of peer review, they have specified exactly what version of it they implemented. Because the problem is, a lot of articles are quite vague about exactly how peer review was implemented. So we don't know if we're comparing like with like. It could be two very, very different ways that peer review have been implemented. So I think this is a real problem. What the literature's tried to do is say, well, we've got all this massive variation. Are there specific design features of peer review that seem to be more successful than others? And I suppose that's the gold standard in the research literature. That's what it's trying to do increasingly. So I'm not going to go through all the variables, but this, if you were thinking of doing peer review, here's just a few different dimensions in which peer review can vary. And if you're going to implement peer review, you'd have to think, well, exactly how am I going to do it? You know, how exactly am I going to implement this thing? So, first of all, what's the type of work that you're going to ask the students to peer review? Is it going to be an essay, a written piece of work, a presentation? Are they all doing the same question? Are they doing different questions? Is it a complete version of the work? Is it a partial version of the work? So what is it? What type of work is it that you're going to get them to review? Then how are you going to match them? So you need a student, Charlotte, when I go and I run out, I'll leave it to, if anybody wants to know the ingenious scheme that Charlotte came up with to deal with this process, I'll leave it to Charlotte when I've run away to explain it. But you have to match the students. So student A is going to review student B's work, is student B going to review student A's work, or is student B going to review student C's work? How are you going to match them up and implement that process? Are you going to just do it randomly? Are you actually going to try and get what you think is a good student to review another good student's piece of work, and get a weak student to review a weak student's piece of work? Or do you deliberately put what you think is a good and a weak student together? All those things you have to consider. How many students then are going to review, and how are you going to organise the feedback process? So when the student produces the piece of work, is only one other student going to look at it, or are 2, 3, 4, 5 students going to look at that piece of work? And actually there's something that seems to be coming out of the research literature about the importance of the number of students who review it. And then, if let's say I've got 2 students or 3 students each reviewing one student's piece of work, do they each just provide separate comments? They do it all individually? Or do the 3 of them do it together and provide one agreed set of feedback to the student? You could do it either way. How much personal contact? Is there complete anonymity with the process? Where does it take place? Do they do it in the classroom? Do they do it out the classroom? Do you do it as an in-class activity, or do you do it online somewhere else? Do you assess what the reviewers have done? Do you actually say that I'm going to mark the quality of the feedback you've produced, or am I going to just give you some marks for participating? Are those marks going to count towards the module? Those are all other things that you probably have to think about before you did it. And also, I assume you're probably going to have some sort of criteria that the students are going to use, as we would, to mark the piece of work against. So, do they simply have exactly the same criteria as the lecturer? Do you give them a slightly different version of the criteria? Do you have a criteria that you evolve with them? You agree with them that they're going to rank the work against? That is not an exhaustive list. I promise you, the amount of different design variables goes on and on and on. But I think there's some of them probably the more important. I think I'm speaking to an audience like this, well, I don't really want to spend any time on this. We all know feedback's very important in the learning process, and I don't really want to spend any time on that. So we know, what we do know is, if we take the Gibson-Simpson stuff, look, feedback works best if it's understandable, it's timely, and it's obviously acted upon by the students. And an interesting thing with peer feedback is, does it provide feedback that is more likely to match those 3 things? Is it feedback that the student thinks is more understandable than the feedback they get from a lecturer? Do they get it quicker? Well, obviously, if a student is only having to mark one of the student or 2 of the students' pieces of work, they can do that far more quickly than an academic having to mark 200 pieces of work. So they can get feedback more quickly, and therefore, is it more likely to be acted upon by the student? Again, I don't want to spend a huge amount of time on this. What are the advantages of receiving feedback from students? For the student, well, obviously they get more of it. It can be provided while the coursework is still live. It could be provided on draft, so they've got a greater incentive to engage with it. Obviously, as we've said, it can be provided in a more timely fashion. It may be written in a language that the students understand. I ran a focus group with some economics students. Maybe it's just economics, I don't know, but they all agreed. One student mentioned this thing called lecturer's language. And when this student mentioned lecturer's language, the other 8 students all said, oh yeah, bloody lecturer's language. We don't understand a word of it. We don't understand the assessment criteria. We don't understand the feedback we get, because it's all written in this strange, odd language that we don't get. So if the feedback is written by a student for a student, is it written in a way that the student's more likely to understand and engage with? And obviously they may get conflicting feedback, which is an interesting idea. Obviously they then have to construct feedback, and one of the key advantages there would be to construct the feedback. It forces them to try and understand the assessment criteria. It forces them, we have a problem, we will sit down and we will read a student's piece of work and we'll think, well, what was the point in giving out the assessment criteria, because they haven't engaged with it at all. And in fact, if only they'd engaged with the assessment criteria, they'd get a much higher mark. Well, of course, what this does is it forces the student to engage with your assessment criteria, or the cut-down version of it, or whatever it is, before they write the final version. So maybe it'll force them to actively try and understand that assessment criteria. Hopefully encourage them to think about the subject in more detail. It's difficult. It's a difficult activity to review, to mark. It's a high-level activity. It's not something that's easy. Again, hopefully they'll see different approaches. It may encourage more debate, but again, I think we'll flip over that pretty quickly. What I really want to get to, so there's a lot of literature that says, well, this peer review is a really good thing, and there's lots of potential advantages from it. It's very varied, there's lots of different ways you can do it, but lots of people are arguing there's these huge potential benefits from it. Yet we don't all do it, and I didn't do it until 4 or 5 years ago. So why doesn't everybody do peer review in their modules? Well, there must be concerns, there must be barriers, otherwise we wouldn't do it, sure. And it's pretty clear from the literature, if you ask students, if you do any work with them, that they are concerned, and there's often resistance from the student body themselves when you do peer review, that they're concerned about the quality of the feedback. It's not the great sage, the great tutor, the wonderful person with all the knowledge. It's just another stupid colleague of mine. And they are concerned about the quality of the feedback they're going to get. And that breaks down into 2 things. They're worried that their colleagues simply won't take the activity seriously, because it's difficult. If you don't really engage with it, it's a difficult thing to do. And they're worried that their colleagues simply don't have the expertise to mark and provide feedback on their work. Then this certainly comes up very, very strongly with economics students. And I'll show you my favourite quote I think I've ever had of a student. Yeah, but what'll happen is, if I give out my work, they'll just nick all my good ideas, won't they? Okay. And I'm really concerned about that. And all I can say is, I've only done this with economics students, and that did come up quite a few times in focus groups. Then students will worry on the other side that they're concerned. They find it quite stressful. Well, hang on a minute, how do I assess another student's piece of work? I haven't got the expertise to do this. So there can be lots of sort of uneasy feelings about doing it. So people might feel uneasy about giving negative feedback to a classmate, to a peer. And also concerns about other students belittling their work. It's surprising how much this comes up, actually. That they're concerned that if other students... It's all right for the lecturer to laugh at my work and belittle it, but I don't want the other students seeing my work. And that's an interesting... I think quite interesting that comes out of it. So, okay, just quickly, this is just some very quiet... I don't know how representative these are. These are some comments from economics students, and they just support. So I don't think people put the effort in, don't think they're bothered, I'm worried, they won't take it seriously, they won't bother reading it. So these, I said 8 out of 38 But the comments that I had, these were, you know, they're all very much in this. I'm concerned that the reviewer's not going to take it seriously. So this then goes back to the design. So what we've struggled with this, and I'm not arguing that we've got this right, but blimey, okay. Could you allocate marks to the peer review process? Okay. And we originally tried to assess the quality of the feedback. That just didn't work. We just never found a way of doing it effectively. So we then reverted to a situation of just giving marks for engagement. If they participate, they get marks. And it's a bit subjective, but it's almost like a sort of threshold. If your engagement is above that level, which we subjectively judge, then we're going to give you 10 marks for it. And I think what I would say is, I mean, most of the research there seems to find that as long as you give students a couple of marks, they're quite irrational. The actual marks you're giving them are so small towards their final degree, you know, it makes a 0.001% difference to their degree classification. But as long as you just throw a couple of marks on it, it can change the way that they engage with the topic. So do you have to give them an incentive to engage with it to get around it? Lots of comments about students not having the expertise. Okay, concerned they just didn't have the expertise to do it. I don't want my work looked at by a novice. I want it looked at by a lecturer. This is quite interesting because there's something that does come out of the literature, and that is, we've never had the resources to do this. Some people in educational literature have tried to look at different designs to see in what circumstances students were more likely to change their work in response to the feedback that they got. And actually, one thing that seems to come out of this literature is students are much more likely to engage with the feedback they receive if it's from more than one other student. Okay? There's almost like if you get comments from 2 or 3 or 4 students, it's much more likely to be acted upon than if it's just one of the students. So Charlotte's come up with this fantastic scheme, because then you've got the logistic issue of how, if you're going to get 2 or 3 students to look at each student's piece of work, how do you do it? Okay? How do you organise that? Charlotte's done all that fantastically well. Do you have agreed or separate comments? Some students actually suggested to me they'd like a student from the year above to look at it. Okay, because then they couldn't nick it, and actually they were more. A second year, not looking at a first year's work, they knew more about it than another first year did. That was an interesting. I've never tried that. That's an interesting idea. The copying, I've got to go. I'm going to go straight forward. I love the fourth comment. I would seriously consider leaving out some of the better bits in the version of my coursework that I submitted for peer review so that it wouldn't be copied. I'd actually submit a separate version because I'm so concerned that students are going to nick all the best bits. But students have real concerns with it. Real concerns with it. So in the design, and again we've just sort of stumbled through this, what we've done is they submit a draft version of their essay. Okay? So they have to submit a 1,500-word essay for their mandatory economic theory module. And in the skills module, which Charlotte runs, is it 800 words? 600. They have to put in a 600-word draft covering the first part of the essay. And we figured that might alleviate. You're not saying you get the whole thing and you can just nick it all, but you get these 600. You do a 600-word draft, and that seems to have overcome some of that resistance. Whether that's the perfect outcome, I don't know. You could get them looking at different questions if they were doing different questions. The problem is the expertise. You've got a real trade-off here. If they're all doing the same question, they're all doing the same topic, then they should have developed some expertise because they're looking at that topic as well. Of course, if they're looking at different topics, they won't be so worried about somebody copying their ideas because they're all doing different questions. But if it's a completely different question, the student's less likely to have the expertise because they haven't been researching that same topic. And that raises an interesting dilemma. I think research outlines and literature reviews, people have done it with those quite effectively, because obviously, I mean, most of our students are absolutely awful at writing research outlines and literature reviews. So this, and again, you can't. It gives you an idea of how to write a literature review, or a research outline, but yours is going to be on a different topic, so you can't just lift this stuff and steal it. So you've got that trade-off, as we've talked about. Timing issues about, I mean, obviously one way, okay, 2 seconds. Timing, obviously what you could do is say they do the peer review after the work is submitted, but then you're removing the advantages of them getting the feedback to act upon. But it would alleviate the fear of that. Right, that's it. That's all so we've gone through 3. That ain't bad. We've gone through 3 of them. That's probably one I thought I was going to do. I'll shut up.
Right. Have you got any? Okay, thank you. Let me be greedy and ask the first question. My problem, because I do a lot of this in various formats, my problem is the popularity context. Students assessing students, and if they know they're good, they give a high mark. If they think that, or if they like them, they give a high mark. Do you encounter that?
Well, I was going to come on. We try to strictly keep it anonymised.
Let me have the PowerPoint, because you can get people.
Yeah. There's a point I was going to come on to. I think actually, and also the student feeling concerned about somebody laughing at how rubbish their work is. So I think the other thing is the students really would always rather the whole process was anonymised. So no student knows the name of the person whose work they're looking at. Now again, there may be administrative. I mean, there's what we're still. I mean, we're still very archaic in using paper, and there's obviously software that probably would enable you to, the software would allocate to different groups and anonymise it for you. You just get an essay, you don't know who wrote it. And I think that comes out the literature strongly. The students would rather the whole thing was kept as anonymous as possible.
But if possible, because I do micro-teaching, they stand in front of them and do and it's formative. But I find if they like the student who's standing up and doing micro-teaching, it would be excellent, even if it was a rubbish micro-teaching session.
Yeah, obviously at the time, if it's a sort of, if obviously it's a written piece of work, it may be, the anonymisation may be better. But, sorry, yeah.
I looked at written versus oral feedback and feedback on higher marked scripts and on lower marked scripts. And I'm always interested in the discourse and the language. Do you do any scaffolding of the language? Do you suggest prompts that they could use, ways that they could express their feedback?
Okay, well, what we did do, I mean, it became clear to us that when we just gave them the assessment criteria, it was lecturers' language. So they couldn't use it. And actually, it's this age-old problem, isn't it? That actually, what we think, when we give them an assessment criteria, we tip them, oh, well, that's all obvious. They know how to do the piece of work because I've given them the assessment criteria. And then you look at the work and it's pretty clear the students haven't got a clue what the assessment criteria means. So what we then did is under each of the criteria, we've sort of put a series of questions that you might ask yourself if you were trying to apply that part of the criteria to that piece of the work, which is sort of I mean, this is really an ad hoc. We just each year evolve it a bit, and iterate it a bit, and that seems to work. Sorry, Marina. That's worked a bit better. So they've got a series of sort of questions we want them to ask themselves. Obviously, they can think of other stuff.
Yeah.
That's the way at the moment we've tried to deal with that as the best we can.
We can take one last question. Yes, Alison.
We actually went to, sorry I'm talking we, Tim and I, because we do teach creative writing, we went to call the assessment, what's it called? Centre for Academic Writing.
Yeah.
And someone came in and spoke to our students about how to peer review each other's work, and it was really effective. And they became far more serious about it after that talk. And what we normally do is we put them in writing groups of about 4. And so then, and they're friendship groups as well, because they choose which writing group they want. And that's been, very useful, but we don't involve grades because we do find that with friends they get
Yeah.
90 and
Yeah, just to add to that, yeah.
Sorry, we need to come to close now because we're running short.
Sure. All I'm saying is, I mean, we do always make sure I think you have to sell it.
yeah.
I think there's resistance to this from students, and I think you've got to take a bit of time. And the thing that you have to sell more than anything is they should get more from giving the feedback than the feedback all the students think the benefit from the feedback they're getting, but actually the much bigger advantage intellectually is engaging with the assessment criteria and trying to review another student's piece. But they don't tend to see that at all until they've done it a few times. I'll show them.
Thank you very much, John. And can I just say,